more Republicans than Democrats are, birthers, for example. But a new Fairleigh Dickinson poll shows nearly two-thirds of Republicans, 64%, believe the president is hiding some specific information about where he was born. How about fixing elections? More than a third of Democrats think George W. Bush's supporters probably rigged the election in Ohio back in 2004 through voter fraud, including a majority of African Americans. About the same number of Republicans, 36%, think Obama's supporters did the same thing to win last November, although there was no evidence of any cheating or anything, even a machine foul-up. And think back to 9/11. More than a third of Democrats are part of the truther crowd. You know, the people who believe President Bush knew about the attacks before they happened, as do nearly 60% of African Americans. Well, the difference in the parties is the knowledge base. Republicans who know more about the news are actually more likely to believe conspiracy theories fueled by right-wing media like Fox. Well, Dan Cassino is a political science professor at Fairleigh Dickinson University, who he conducted this poll, and Michael Smerconi's nationally syndicated radio host and MSNBC contributor brought it to our attention. So, Michael, you brought this to our attention. I just want to get you, as a generalist like me, what do you think this told you that surprised you, this poll?
Well, it reinforced what I've suspected all along, which is that the business model at the far right is predicated on fear, that they scare the crap out of people. There's never any accountability. For some reason, Chris, people don't remember 6 months later that they were told there was another catastrophe looming and therefore hold those members of the media accountable. They still stay tuned in, whether it's talk radio or Fox or some other oracle that's on the right.
Yeah, it's almost like an addiction to being afraid. And let me ask you, Mr. Cassino, professor, help me out on this. What did you decide that you learned here? As just a person doing this kind of clinical study, what do you think was surprising in terms of brain soup here? Different brain soup, the way people's brains work, right and left.
The big deal here is that there really does seem to be something of an asymmetry. Now, both sides do tend to believe in conspiracy theories. Conspiracy theories are not something we just see on the right. The right and the left are embracing them. The big difference is these informational effects, and that's really what was most interesting to me. In general, we expect that the more you know about the world, the less likely you're going to be to believe in these conspiracy theories, and we find that's just not the case for everyone. And I think that is something because of the informational content of right-wing media. If you're a Republican and you search out more information on these conspiracy theories, if you turn on Fox News, you are going to wind up not getting more corrective information. When Fox News covered this very poll, it was Tucker Carlson talking about how absurd it is that there was all this belief in conspiracy theories, and then asking why President Obama hadn't released his college transcripts. So there is something with the informational content on the right. And I've done past research on this.
That's called balance. That's called, what's it called, fair and balanced. Well, you always have allowance for the crazy people as well as the sane people. You know, Michael, you're enjoying this because I got a couple things here. Let's start with this thing about birthers. The president released his official birth certificate. Like, he had to go through the humiliation, I believe, of going out to Honolulu and asking them to release the documents that normally aren't released. And, okay, he got it over with. Why wasn't that enough? Why did any sane person at that point forward have any questions? What more could you ask? Did you have to believe that everything was cooked not to buy the facts?
They are masters. They are masters at taking kernels of truth and wrapping them in tremendous fiction and then weaving it together in a way that sounds like it could all make sense. There's never any sort of drill down moment where people say, wait a minute, time out. Let's analyze this and think about all the things that would have had to take place and all the people who would have had to be involved for any of this to be true. The great example, I think, recently is Benghazi, and we just came through those hearings yesterday. Instead of legitimate concern about the death of 4 Americans and making sure that we're protected, it was all about what did Ambassador Rice say when she went on those shows? Why was she out there? Why wasn't Hillary? It was crazy.
Yeah, well, let's go over the African-American piece of this. How do you explain that, Professor? Is this, I know we have so much segregation still in our society where people don't have access to maybe centers of power as much as other people do. Is that it? It's just, you don't know anybody that works at the State Department. You don't know anybody who works in City Hall, or you do. How explain this differential between white and black on this thing?
I think there's two big things going on. The first is that people who are generally out of power, who feel like the centers of power are more distant from them, are more likely to believe conspiracies because they just don't see what's going on. They don't don't feel like they have any control. The second thing that's going on with African Americans is they actually have been the subject of conspiracies in the past. I mean, we had those syphilis experiments of Tuskegee. So there have been some actual conspiracies that have targeted them.
So the worst case scenario turned out to be true.
Absolutely. The third thing that's happening is that we do see that African Americans have much stronger differential in terms of how much they like Republicans and Democrats. Essentially, African Americans like Democrats way more than they like Republicans. African Americans are to the Democratic Party what essentially the entire Republican Party is to the Republican Party.
I thought that's well said. You know, Michael, this didn't start, just so we don't think we're the only people on the planet this generation. My dad worked in Navy intelligence in Philadelphia, down in South Philly, all through the war. He was an enlisted guy, a chief petty officer. But he, near at the end of his life, and I love my dad, he would still believe that Roosevelt had something to do with Pearl Harbor, that he knew was coming, and because he wanted to get in the war against the Nazis. I mean, is this your experience of talking on the radio with people? Do you sense that this idea that there's always some liberal in Washington doing something horrible to the country, like letting us get attacked and losing our Pacific Fleet on purpose, which would have been not only grounds for impeachment, but for execution if he ever got caught doing something like that? I don't care if he was Roosevelt.
I think what separates that from this, I mean, Chris, I'm always willing to give a good ear to a conspiracy theory. They're entertaining. But what's different is now they're being presented in a cohesive fashion for a political purpose, and they have never let up on this guy. Listen, if I only relied on Drudge for my news, I'd hate him too. It's remarkable to me the level of coordination and how the echo chamber is all functioning as moving parts of the same machinery these days. And the danger is that there are some among us who only get their news from these outlets. And they were totally blindsided in the election. It was like a truck hit them because they didn't believe that there were other Americans out there who weren't listening to the same sort of things that they were. That's the danger of it.
I think that's great. Well, we know Republicans are a self-selecting group who tend to congregate together, but nothing summed that up better than the former chairman of the main Republican Party who was stunned to hear blacks had voted there on Election Day. Let's watch this bit of whatever.
In some parts of rural Maine, there were dozens of black people who came in and voted Election Day. Everybody has the right to vote. But nobody in town knows anybody that's black. How did that happen? I don't know.
What do you make of that, Professor?
Well,
that testimony by a Republican that their blacks showed up in the voting booths and nobody had seen blacks before, therefore they must be from somewhere else. It could be that they live in a segregated community, just a guess.
So people on both sides tend to believe that there is some sort of conspiracy, that there is a stolen election, because they don't know anyone who votes for the other party. On both sides, our issue networks, when we talk about politics, are pretty homogeneous. Democrats tend to congregate with Democrats, Republicans tend to congregate with Republicans. We don't know anyone who voted for the other guy, and as a result, we don't know how this possibly could have happened.
I think there's so much political cocooning in this country, so much hiding within your own political network, and Michael knows all about it. People live in their own world so much they don't even know the larger country. Michael Smerconi says, always, thanks for giving us this great story. And Professor Cassino, thanks for joining